Well, welcome along to the Sky Sports Ashes Vodcast. It's not going to be a very easy listen or watch if you're an England supporter, because Australia have retained the Ashes. 3-0 the series stands, still with 2 test matches to go, and the numbers overnight were very depressing for England at the MCG. All out for 68. The test match was over in 7 sessions. The Ashes gone in 12 days. Rob Key, Nasser Hussain and Michael Atherton join me. Michael, you were at the MCG, specifically with today. What was it like viewing that quite spectacular collapse?
Well, actually, the second evening was when the ground was at its liveliest. There were about 40-odd thousand in on that second evening when England just had an hour to bat. And you could see it coming, built up to this crescendo at the end of the day. And the bowling was fantastic from Australia. It was very, very difficult. The pitch was spicy and quick. And the crowd just were wild, really. Quite a lot of the Australian commentators who are from Melbourne were likening it to the crowd they get for the AFL finals there, which usually have about 110,000 in the G. But they said it was a similar atmosphere last night, and it was really wild. So it was very dramatic. And this morning, sometimes after a night like that, a team can find it quite hard to recreate that intensity and atmosphere. And just for the first 4 overs or so, I thought that might be the case because it was a little flat. Root and Stokes took 3 or 4 boundaries off Mitchell's start, but the moment Stark got one through Stokes, then it was on again. The crowd kind of found their voice, and the demise came very, very quickly there. I mean, there's a good story here because Scott Boland, who's a local player, 32 years of age, making his debut, of course, the second Indigenous cricketer to play for the Australian men's team. And the man of the match award here at the Boxing Day test is the Johnny Muller award. And he took that. So it was quite an emotional morning here at the MCG for Australia. And of course, regaining or retaining the Ashes in 3 days here and less than 12 days. You said 12 days, which is right, actually. But if you take into account the number of overs bowled because of a slower over rate at Brisbane, it's probably challenging Nasser's record in 0-2, I think.
Talking about being a bit depressing and a bit down, Nass, when you do lose an Ashes series in the manner that Joe Root has lost this one, and you did when you was captain, put us in Joe Root's headspace at the minute. How do you feel?
Well, you know that people will be talking about your position. You know that every single thing in English cricket will be questioned. It always happens after an Ashes series, especially away from home. What's that, 12 of the last 13 tests they've lost? You know, it's not just, we get hammered in Australia. 5-0 Flintoff, 4-0, 4-0, 3-0 down now. It's that, what goes through your head is that everyone will then question everything right from grassroots, as I'm sure we're going to do in this vodcast. So your position becomes open for debate, the coach's position, English cricket, English batting, the structure of the game, Ashley Giles, everything gets questioned. And Root was right yesterday to say, listen, now's not the time to talk about this stuff from within the team as an England captain. He's got to try and stop what looks like a 5-0 whitewash coming this way. He's got to do something to try and get his mind and the mind of his team right for Sydney, which is another cracking test match. As we all know, the SCG is one of the great venues of the world, and he's just got to try and get his side, and in particular, his batting lineup in some kind of space. It was a good pitch to bowl on, but 68 all out. I mean, this batting lineup is in a really bad place, and it can't carry on like this. They've got to do something about the batting. There is no easy solutions, but the batting is in a really bad place for English cricket at the moment.
Well, we will go into greater detail, but now sticking with you and just Joe Root as a captain and in that dressing room, the leader of the team. Do you think he's lost the dressing room? Did you feel you'd lost the dressing room once you'd been defeated so quickly? Do you feel like your senior players are looking at you going, well, we're going down the wrong route here?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't like talking about myself. I knew that when Michael Vaughan came in and took over the white ball side, and I saw the energy in that white ball side, and my lacking of energy. I think that's something I haven't mentioned that I should. You pretty much know when your time as captain is done. You know, I don't buy into all the players looking at you and losing the dressing room. They need to look at themselves, really. They ain't been bowled out for 68 because of Joe Root's captaincy. So the players need to look at themselves. And when I lost the Ashes, I didn't really worry about what the players thought of me, to be honest. I never did as a captain. But when I saw the energy in the white ball series in the summer after against South Africa, I pretty much knew my tanks were empty. I'd gone to that well too many times and I was done as an England cricket captain. That's the only decision Joe's got to make. Can he dig deep after this series to try and lift themselves for more cricket in the future? Can he go again as England captain? So really for me, the decision is with Root. Has he run out of mental reserves to take this side forward?
Well, we'll go into greater detail about what went wrong and the structure of cricket, all of the stuff that Michael was alluding to just a few moments ago. But Rob, we got to give credit to Australia here. I mean, have they surprised you?
Well, you knew their bowling attack was good. I did think their batting was, they've been made to look a better side because England have been so poor, really. I mean, that trip that Nasser's talking about, I was on that. And, I feel that this is one of the worst. It's probably the worst Ashes defeat that we've seen, because when we went on that trip, we sort of knew we were playing against some of the greatest players that have ever played the game. Shane Warne, McGrath, people like that. And Australia, this side's got some good players. But if you think back to the start of this trip when Tim Paine was ousted as captain, there was all the talk about Justin Langer, all of this type of stuff. We actually thought, I thought Australia were going to win. I thought England might have a chance of taking them close, but they've just made so many bad decisions. The batting has been poor, but got worse. So really, I mean, this has been a horrendous trip because it's actually been worse than we thought. It's made Australia look better than they are, even though they are a good side. They're a good bowling attack, but they're not a great team.
A couple of the points of difference, Atho, would be catching. You might mention energy in the field on the last time we spoke. And also, I'm just going to pick out one player who's surprised me and impressed me. Cameron Green, has he given an extra dimension to the Australian side?
Yeah, their attack is a very good attack, I think. It's pretty unrelenting. Cameron Green gives them that extra added dimension. Of course, they've missed Cummins through isolation and Hazelwood through injury. And the lads who've come in have done really well. Jai Richardson got 5 at Adelaide, and Scott Boland, unbelievable figures in this game. So their bench strength has looked pretty good. I think that's where their strength lies in this team. Their bowling, you've got a spinner who's taken more than 400 test wickets as well, and their catching, their energy and intensity in the field and the standard of their close catching is far better than England's. There are some frailties in this Australian batting lineup, and had England taken their chances, they would have exposed some of those frailties. But England let Labuschagne and Warner off at the Gabba and have missed some chances. They've got 3 very, very good players there in Warner, Smith and Labuschagne, but then 1 or 2 frailties around that, and England haven't been good to exploit them. So I agree with Rob. I don't think this is this matches up to the great Australian sides of the late 1990s and early 2000s. But I think it's a good Australian side that has a very good and relentless bowling attack.
Right, England's issues. And Nasser, I'm going to come to you to start with batting. People want to know how a test side can get bowled out like that for 68. If you look at the calendar year, Joe Root, 1,708 runs. We'll come back to that because that's a staggering achievement. Next best, Rory Burns with 530. The next best, extras. Why are England struggling so badly with the bat? That's what the viewers at home, that's what the England supporters will want to know. Perhaps even the team will want to know.
Because it's right through the system, really. I had that rant at Edgbaston, stood next to you, about some of our techniques that we're seeing in the domestic game. Kesey, I think, upset nearly every groundsman in the world, and the pitches that's been played on in domestic cricket, but also the techniques and, the preparation. Someone like in the summer, we saw people coming in that hadn't played any red ball cricket for months, and suddenly they've got to take on a very good Indian attack. They go to Australia, suddenly Zach Crawley comes in halfway through the tour, which is always going to happen in Australia. We've all been to Australia with their bowling attack. There's going to be 2 or 3 at least struggling. It was more than that on this trip. So you must make sure that your backroom players have had, and your batsmen have had enough cricket to get into that test match. And Crawley and Bairstow just didn't have enough cricket. You cannot throw someone like Crawley in on the back of 3 months without a red ball game. They had that opportunity. Some of the decision-making off the field has been poor. They had the opportunity of playing him in the Lions game. They didn't take that opportunity. It is throughout our system, Wardy. I saw some stats about the lads in the last 6 years that have made their debut for England. Can you name, when Michael Atherton came into the England side, he looked an international player. When Joe Root came in, when Graham Thorpe came in, when players came in from previous eras, even though they weren't successful eras, you could look at them and go, this lad is going to be an international. When Alistair Cook came in, Andrew Strauss, I was there on his debut. Immediately you went, Strauss is going to be Prescothic. We have tried everyone, in the opening slot since Cook and Strauss. The openers, you look at the great sides that have played the game. West Indies, Haynes and Greenwich. Australia, Langer and Hayden. England, Cook and Strauss. If your openers cannot if you're constantly 10 for 2, the opposition have momentum straight away. And England's openers, and they've tried either way. They've tried the lads that get runs in county cricket. Sibley and Burns have been prolific in county cricket. So if anyone says pick players who are getting runs, that's what they've done. They've been found wanting. So they go the other way. They go on potential, and like the potential of Crawley, as we saw at the Aegeus Bowl with that wonderful 250, the potential of Hamid. They've tried that, and those are struggling as well. So don't just look at the 11 names on that team sheet at Melbourne. Look at the whole structure, right from youth level all the way through to the end product, as to why we're not producing the batters that we used to.
Pitches again, Keezy?
I've said this so many times, but it's not just me actually, and it's not the only reason as well. It's a big factor. There are so many big factors in all of this. But I've seen Joe Root talk about it. I saw Moeen Ali talk about it today. I spoke to players last night. I was just WhatsApping a few people still playing the game, and I asked them about what do you think the reasons are? Why are batsmen struggling at the moment? And they talk about pitches. They talk about how you've just got to try and get to 30 quickly because one's got your name on it. How Travis Head averaged 11 in county cricket, and he's done well out in Australia. How the Australians who play county cricket have a WhatsApp group called Steve-O's Going to Get You, and they make fun of the fact that a little 68-mile-an-hour bowler, none of them can get a run against. That includes now the best batsman in the world, and how the games are pretty much over in 3 days. So that's one thing. And by the way, for the groundsmen out there, I'm not saying you're doing a bad job. I think it's actually, I'm sure you're working very hard. Unfortunately, whether it's environmental issues, whatever, pitches just aren't as good as what they used to be. Paul Farbrace is talking about coaches being lazy, how they're not prepared to actually turn around to a player and actually try and improve them. They just sort of say, oh, good shot, mate. Trevor Bayliss used to call them the good shot, well bowled coaches. Well, that's all they do. It's all about feeling good. But then you wonder, don't you? Because when England had a selector in Ed Smith, who actually was prepared to ruffle a few feathers and was prepared to actually upset the players, they got rid of him. He got sacked. And he didn't get sacked because we think he was a bad selector. He got sacked because the players didn't like him. So then what coach is going to go out there and try and make a difference and try and actually put his neck on the line to try and improve a player in that way and maybe upset him at some case? There are so many things. Then you've got all the white ball focus, all this stuff. There are so many questions that we need to answer, and pitches is one massive one.
So then, Michael, you open the batting. If you're opening the batting, you've got to have a very sound fundamental technique. Yet in Burns and Sibley, we have had two of England's openers who have very different techniques, shall we say, not the norm, lots of moving parts. With Keezy's point about coaches, should a coach go to these players and say, listen, you might be scoring runs at county cricket, but the next step, you're required to make a couple of changes. Do you think coaches are challenging players? Were you surprised to see these guys picked with the unorthodox techniques that they had, despite the weight of runs they've scored in county cricket? By the way, with Burns batting, at the Oval, good pitch to bat, and Sibley at Edgbaston likewise.
Well, I've we've gone through these arguments so often in the past. When you get beat in the Ashes and suddenly everything is wrong, it kind of happens once every 4 years as we come down to Australia and get hammered. and then everything is wrong with the game. I actually, in this instance, would focus on the specifics of this tour, because I don't think that those in charge, in this instance, Chris Silverwood and Joe Root, can escape the responsibility for what has been an error-strewn tour. I think you start there. There have been a lot of mistakes made when it comes to selection and strategy, and had things been better on this tour, you could have seen a slightly better outcome. So I don't think you can just brush it off and say everything is systemic. The bigger picture is the problem. I think there has to be an element of personal responsibility for things that have gone wrong on this tour, because there have been too many errors and bad mistakes made. So I'd start there. But secondly, obviously, when you look at England's record in Australia over the last few years, it's 3-0 down after 3 here, 4-0 down in 2017, a whitewash in 2013, a whitewash in 06-07. These whitewashes, possibly 3 in the space of a generation, and it happened once in the 20th century. So you'd have to say that the kind of conditions in England and Australia are becoming more divergent, because English players are finding it harder to challenge down here in Australia than they did before, for whatever reason. So you have to look at that. And I think in the end, if your system is strong and competitive, all the talk about coaching is slightly peripheral, because what you'll have is just a natural Darwinian process where the best players come to the top of the pile, and the best players will take wickets and the best players will score runs if that system is strong and competitive. And I just don't think it's strong enough and competitive enough right now, for lots of the reasons that we've talked about before. 18 teams, talent spread quite thin, number of matches played at tricky times of the season. So a shorter, more condensed, more high quality competition would in the end allow the best players to come through, and those best players then should be able to make that step up to Test cricket more easily. I'm not sure myself that coaching is the fundamental issue here. I think there are some odd theories knocking around. I mean, we saw some of them in the build up to this game with, England's openers batting in one leg in a very visible net area, which you'll all remember from the MCG. It's right there for everybody to see. And that just, well, if you're going to bat on one leg, go and do it in the indoor school away from prying eyes would be my advice there. But probably the best advice is not to bat on one leg. So I think there are some odd theories around, but in the end, a good, strong, competitive structure will bypass all that.
Do you think that, so we've gone through a lot of batsmen, haven't we? I think that the 17 batsmen I've seen a stat that have made their debut since 2016, and none of them average over 32, which is staggering, really. You were making that point earlier, Nas. But do you think that the players have been getting worse? Because now a lot of them actually have been in that setup. They have been in this England team now for a while. So it's not just necessarily county cricket. Actually, it looks to me like they've got worse the longer they've been in that setup. Is that a fair challenge or not?
I think that goes back to Wardy's question that he put to Ath there, really, is when do you make a change? When you see a player come into a side ready for a test match week. I mean, I give you Zach as an example. I know you work with Zach, but there are some technical issues in his batting. His bat does come across the line of the ball, and quality bowlers like Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood, and the rest will expose those technical failings. Same with Burns, same with Sibley. The problem is that they have mentally strong players, like Burns, who have some very odd techniques. And they have quite pleasing techniques in Ollie Pope that is looking still mentally to find his way in test match cricket. He looks frenetic at the crease. He doesn't look calm. He looks exposed in the fact that everything seems a bit panicky. What you want is someone with a decent technique and who's calm. Milan is a good example of that. Joe Root is the greatest example of that. He just looks, since he came in the side, that he's a test match player. So I work with Fletcher a lot. Fletcher would see players and he'd see problems in their technique, but he would be very wary on a test match week to go up to them and say, this is the way you've batted all your career, and I think it's wrong. I think we need to change it. In the biggest week of your life, I think we need to change it because you're going to get exposed at the next level. So that's got to be a gradual process as an England coach at the highest level. And it's the point that Ather's made over the years. In fact, what you need are your best coaches at a slightly, not lower, but the layers below, so that when they come in, they look ready for international cricket. It shouldn't be about the England coach suddenly going, your technique is horrendous, we need to change that. I have noted on this tour, there seems to have been, and it goes back to At's point about one-legged batters at the MCG, and the elite analysis from this vodcast is that it's not the best way to go, to bat on one leg. But I have noticed on this tour, there seems to be a lot of tinkering. I think like we saw footage of Stokes in the warm-up game. I think you sent it on our WhatsApp group, Rob. And immediately I went, geez, Ben's got some massive trigger movements there. Massive back and across that he never did before. And in fact, the ball from Stark yesterday, suddenly he didn't do that. He didn't do that movement and got bowled through the gate. Hamid seems to have gone almost like a right-handed Gary Balance. So he's going like all the way back in his crease, and Cummins bowls in what is virtually a half volley, and he nicks it because he's so far back, you can bowl that fuller length. So I think there's been like a change in mindset from the England coaches on this trip, or in the last 6 months, that before that it was a bit arm round because of what was said earlier. You can't upset players, we're going to put an arm round them, you're going the right way, we believe in you. I think in the last few months they've said sort of enough is enough, and we are going to go hard at you. The footage, we're going to make you sit there after Adelaide and watch footage of all your dismissals. I think they're both extremes, really. You've got to work as a coach, you have to work with a player. And you also have to give them time. You know, you have to give. It's not easy facing this attack in Australia. You do have to give them time. But people will say out there, England fans will say, we've given our batters a lot of time. We're seeing no result. And as you're saying, we're actually going in the wrong direction.
Well, Keezy, I'll come back to you then. Are you talking then when they're in the system about the Lions and the Lions coaches and not picking things up in that? It's not just county cricket. So again, with the role of the coach or whatever, I saw some footage of Dom Sibley batting about 4 years ago when actually he's quite orthodox, quite side on, can access extra cover, etc. Then he gets in the test arena and he frees at the point of release and his hands are in a completely different place. So how has he got through that period without someone just tapping him on the shoulder? And even if he just says, look, this is what you were doing and this is what you are now doing, are you happy with it? Is that about the Lions as well? Are they failing?
No, I think Paul Farbrace's point, which I would tend to agree with, is that it's right through the coaching system. You know, Dom Sibley actually does work one-to-one with a coach outside of the county system. And, you know, he has various theories, the guy that he works with. And, you know, he would argue that they've worked quite well for Dom Sibley. He scored a lot of runs, but it is an odd technique and it's a different way to go. I think generally, what happens is with a lot of these players is that, and when you speak to the senior guys in county cricket still, you know, these young kids are sort of lost. And because they go into county cricket, I saw at the end of my career, the Bell Drummonds and people like that, and they're crying out for help because they're going out and they're schnicking off or they're getting LBW and the pitch is nibbling a bit and they're finding it tough. And then they go to plan B, then they go to plan C and they're in technique D or whatever it is. But no one really wants to say to anyone, no coach, it seems, wants to go and say, hang on, mate, that's not the right way to go. You know, let's just stick to what you've got. You know, let's make you as good as you possibly can at what you're doing, or having your hands out there isn't right, because there's so much fear that if you do say something and it's wrong, then you're going to make it even worse. But my only counter to that is, why are you getting paid so much money, a lot of you, if that's your job? If your job is to actually improve players, your job as a coach, I think, is to shortcut the process. All your experience you've had as a coach, everything you've learned, is to actually just impart that knowledge so the players don't make the same mistakes you did or make mistakes, and you're there to get them to the point they want to be quicker than if you weren't there. So you have to be able to take a chance and actually try and improve these players somewhere along the line, give them some input. You know, how many coaches, when we did that, you guys spoke about batting off stump, on off stump. I had it, because I had it. How many coaches rung you up and said in county cricket, or spoke to you and said, "Oh, that was brilliant, that stuff on off stump. No one listens to us though. I don't think it's a good idea." You're the batting coach of one of the counties. That is your job. If you don't think that's the right plan and you think it's wrong, why are you waiting for Hussain, Atherton and Butcher to prove to your players that it's wrong? That is why you are paid. These guys aren't paid to say that, really, to coach players and tell them what they're doing wrong. That's your job as a coach. Tell them if you think it's wrong.
I mean, I agree completely with what Rob said there, quite passionately, actually. I completely agree with that because I know he feels very strongly about this, but I also feel strongly about personal responsibility. It is your game. And we've now sat here for 20 minutes talking about coaching. It is your game. Take ownership of your game. I never walked off when I was having problems against Courtney Walsh or whoever and said, "You know what, that was my coach's fault." When Ath suddenly developed his scissor hands against Glenn McGrath and his bat was coming across it, he wasn't walking off looking at his coach or whoever, Mickey Stewart or whoever was coach, saying, "Can you help me out with this, please?" When Graham Gooch getting out to Terry Alderman LBW because he was going back and across, he looked at his own game, decided to stay leg side of the ball and worked out a technique. These are professional cricketers. Take ownership of your own game. Just find a way. I don't mind you having all these techniques. The game is full of wonderful, look at Steve Smith. The game is full of wonderful, but if you're going to go down that road, it is about getting runs. Do it however you want to do it, but the end product has to be about runs. Take ownership of your own game and get runs and let the bigger picture be sorted out. If you've got a problem with pitches, make a statement about it. Go and speak to Ashley Giles and go and tell him the pitches in domestic cricket are not good enough. Look at what New Zealand did. We had Simon Dool with us this summer. He said quite clearly they were going through a very similar thing. The one big change they made was in their domestic cricket. They played on better pitches, not flatter pitches. And you can see the results from that with the type of bowling, the spinners and the batting, more importantly. So if you've got a problem with the bigger picture, take ownership of the game as well. And tell people, don't ring up Rob Key or WhatsApp Rob Key saying, "Go and do it. Take ownership of the whole system almost."
Haven't they done that? How many times have you heard Joe Root say that? I've heard players say that all the time. They're constantly going on about it. I agree, personal responsibility. Why have we got so many bloody coaches then everywhere? If the job is that you're the one who's got to do it yourself, why do young players need coaches? I get, you guys are probably the exception rather than the rule. You're bloody good players. Sometimes these players need help. Some of these young players need guidance, whether it's about mentality, anything like that. That's your job. That's why you get paid. Shortcut the process. Do it quicker for the player.
Moving it on, there are no straightforward solutions, as we've already mentioned. But what about the structure, Ath, of domestic cricket? Too congested, competition's been played at the wrong time. How would you streamline it? What, in your opinion, would look a better structure?
Well, it's a great paradox that I kind of slightly referred to before, that ECB is positioning the game for a white ball future, really. I mean, they probably wonder how many nations we're playing Test cricket in 10 years' time. So they've had a white ball reset post the 2015 World Cup. A lot of the summer is put now to white ball cricket, the Blast and the 100. And the championship has been marginalised. So that's the fundamental paradox, really, that they've got to try and tackle. On the one hand, they're thinking of this kind of commercial future for the game. But on the other hand, I also really get the sense that people are quite angry because there's still a majority, I would suggest, who like Test cricket in England and like Ashes cricket above all. And certainly the kind of comments that I've been hearing and seeing on social media and below the line and pieces that, I write, and you just listen to people, there's a bit of anger and frustration that they feel that England's Test team has been marginalised, that the county championship has been slightly hollowed out. So that's a paradox, and that's not easy to solve in an 18 county system with 4 competitions. There's basically too much to fit into too short a time. In terms of the Test match team, it's very simple. What you want is a short, condensed, high quality, first class program. Now, how you get there is not simple. That is complex because it might might need some fundamental change. But that's what you want, a high quality, first class programme, which will produce top quality cricketers. Australia won this series because they did the basics better for longer. They bowled faster, they caught their catches, they were more athletic and dynamic in the field, and their batting was essentially more orthodox. That's it. I mean, you can come up with as many theories as you like, but the fundamentals of their cricket were stronger than England's. And that really comes from a better first-class system that they have. And that's it, really. I think you can overcomplicate things. I think a lot of our chat so far about coaches and techniques is slightly overcomplicating the matter.
In terms of the decisions that have been made at times, Nas, we've all referred to it through these podcasts, have been odd sometimes, to say the least. Great guy, Chris Silverwood. Is he the right guy to be in charge of England?
I'd say he's incredibly vulnerable at the moment. I think he's under pressure. You know, I think at the beginning of the year when England went down the rotation policy, Ath sat in one of these podcasts and says, let's judge him by the end of the year. Let's not judge him by results or the one-off test match here and there. Judge him by results at the end of the year. And England have lost 9 test matches this year, which is their worst ever year in test match cricket. And those results speak for themselves. Rob Key's point is an excellent one. Are cricketers getting better under this setup, or are they getting worse? I definitely don't see them getting better, especially in the batting. When you take on that role as head selector, and Ed Smith has had a great Ashes series, by the way. So when you take on that role as national selector and everything, the accountability stops at your door, you better make sure, A, you win games, and B, you make some good decisions. And as Ath has said right at the top of this podcast, some of the decisions have been shocking, really. And, you know, Ath went through the fundamentals there. He didn't mention the decision-making. You know, Australia, Brisbane play the right side. Adelaide play the right side. They bring in Richardson for that test. He gets 5 for. They bring in Ball and the horses for courses. They're selecting the right horses for courses. We're selecting the right horses for courses, but at the wrong venues. You know, it's just like the decision-making in this tour has been abysmal. It's not just this tour. You go back to Ahmedabad with 4 seamers under lights and 28 of the 30 wickets fall to spin and the game's over in 2 days. So there's a history of errors and decision-making. You go back to Lords against New Zealand where there's a full house and there's a potential of a run chase. And Joe Root and Chris Silverwood feel that we're not good enough to try and even try for an hour to chase down that score. That tells you somewhere of where this team think they are mentally, that they're not even going to think about chasing down that game, that score against New Zealand. There are mitigating circumstances. It cannot be easy. England play more test match cricket than anyone else. And it cannot be easy. England coach in COVID times, and he does have to look after the mental well-being and the mental welfare of his players. And he has done that. And I applaud him for that. But it has left him in a very precarious position because we all know that you are judged by results and performance, and both have been shocking this year.
I mean, he looks to me, and this is only from what you see, you know, in interviews and stuff like that, and the decisions and everything that's happened, he looks so out of his depth. You know, I hope he got paid well. When they turned around, when Ashley Giles turned around to him and said, by the way, I'm getting rid of the selector, I'm getting this, you are now in charge of everything. I hope that he got paid well, because it's put him in a position that he is just not capable of. I don't know many coaches that would have been. You probably needed one of the most astute, one of the blokes with the most amount of credibility. He knew more about Test cricket in particular than anyone else, with a captain as well who needed help, who was crying out for help, whether he was saying it himself, but it was clearly obvious that Joe Root needed help. He needed someone. And I don't think Chris Silverwood has been that man at any stage. And the decisions that have been made throughout that year, you know, and some of this did happen as well when Ed Smith was a selector, don't get me wrong, but, you know, he's just so out of his depth with it.
After you getting the impression that Chris Silverwood is just the sole selector, or is he taking advice from other inputs and perhaps it's getting a bit confused?
He will take advice from Joe Root and other people around the leadership group, but unfortunately all the responsibility lies with him, because that's how Ashley Giles has set things up. Previously you had the national selector and that responsibility was slightly diffuse. You didn't quite know who to blame, if you like, because you've got the captain, you've got the head coach, you've got the national selector. Unfortunately, the way that Ashley Giles has set things up now, there's only one man to blame. And of course, there are deeper issues than the blame game, which inevitably comes around. But I'm afraid that's it. Ashley Giles wanted clear lines of accountability, and that's, I'm afraid, is what he will get. I can't see a situation where Chris Silverwood will survive this tour.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I'd say on the back of what Ath said there about the blame game. I do get a bit, not cross, but we've been here. This is not the first Ashes tour that we've ended up 3-0 down, 4-0 down, 5-0 down. You know, the problems with English cricket and England Test match cricket and England's red ball cricket and batting is not about Chris Silverwood. So everyone wants their little bit of blood. They want someone to be accountable. They want someone to fall on their sword. Make a change if you think it's going to improve our cricket. Don't just make a change because, well, someone's got to be responsible. Silverwood goes. Will we be a better side tomorrow if Chris Silverwood goes? If Joe Root steps down as captain? So don't do it because someone needs to be axed. Do it because it's the right thing to do.
Sorry to interrupt there, but that's the danger with the way it's set up now. That you'll end up with the danger of going down a football route, where if you pile all the responsibility and accountability on one man, as Ashley Giles has done with Chris Silverwood, when and if things go wrong, that's what will happen. And that's what happens in football, really. You just get this merry-go-round of losing managers every time there's a downturn in results. And I think that's an unhealthy situation to have. Now, as I said, I don't think Chris Silverwood will survive this tour, but I think it was a mistake to make the change that Ashley Giles made, where he got rid of a national selector and loaded all this responsibility and accountability onto one man. It was a strategic mistake, in my view.
So talking about accountability, Ath, what about Ashley Giles and his position?
Well, I think there's a kind of absence of authority there. More generally, you've got an ECB without a chairman. CEO's been there quite a long time. They've got one or two issues off the field, which have been, quite well publicised of late. And now this downturn in the Ashes is throwing a spotlight on the authority at the heart of the England team. You've got Joe Root, who's right at the end of his cycle, Chris Silverwood, who, as I've said, I don't think will survive, and Ashley Giles, who is making the decisions that we're criticising here, both on a strategic level and an individual level, because it was Ashley Giles who brought Chris Silverwood in. So I think there are real problems at the heart of the ECB in terms of what you might call the authority there, or the lack of authority.
Keezy, I'm going to come to you about Joe Root, and if he feels that he's come to the end of his cycle, as Ath was alluding to there, if he feels that way and he feels a new voice is going to be needed in that dressing room, what are the options? Well,
yeah, I suppose that is the key question. Does he want to still do it? If he did, do you know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see, and this is the problem, because the people aren't available probably. I'd love to see how Joe Root would have gone with a Ricky Ponting, a Stephen Fleming, a Mahela Jayawardene. Some of these guys who know the game inside out at that level. That's what I feel he needed. A Gary Kirsten, someone like that, it's not always about how good a player you've been, don't get me wrong, otherwise I'd never be able to speak about the game. But it's just about what that captain needs. And Owen Morgan is fine with a Chris Silverwood, because Owen Morgan is a brilliant leader, all that type of stuff. And that's the only thing I would say, because often when captains get to this point, as these two would know better than anything, and it happened to Alistair Cook, it's your batting that goes. It's the weight of captaincy that just means you just can't keep on going, and scoring runs becomes too much of a chore, becomes too hard. Captaincy actually has brought the best out in Joe Root. The other options, if they're not, there's only really Ben Stokes. Ben Stokes is the only one that you look at who's another dead cert in this team. Well, obviously Jimmy Anderson is, but who can be the future captains? I think Stokes did a brilliant job, actually. And you speak to some of those players, they thought he was fantastic when he captained that white ball series against Pakistan, I think it was in the summer. And I love his mentality and everything, but there's obviously the problems that that you have when you give it to an all-rounder. And history suggests with Botham and Flintoff that it doesn't work out well, but you shouldn't be judged by that. I suppose it's a bit unfair.
How do you see it, Nas?
With Root, well, I think firstly we haven't touched upon it in this podcast. It's all been doom and gloom, but
we'll come on to his batting in a sec.
His batting this year, with everything that's been going on around him, with those 9 test losses and the chaos and COVID, to watch him bat the way he has done this year, carrying that side day in, day out, going in at 15, 20 for 2 every single time. I think his batting has just been phenomenal, and not just stats. People get runs. It's the way he gets his runs and his mindset at the crease. He's playing with a smile on his face. I think there was a story I wasn't watching the other day. I was on Twitter where a newspaper blew across the MCG and he picked it up and started doing the crossword with the umpire or something. I mean, when you're 3-0, just about to go 3-0 down in the Ashes, and you're carrying England's batting line up for the last 2 years, and you're still in that mindset when you can have a smile for the game. So I think that is something we mustn't forget, Wardy, that as an England cricket captain, your primary focus is about winning test matches. And he's not doing that. So him, like Silverwood, will be under pressure now. The axe could fall on him. But you are also an ambassador for your game. And you cannot tell me that Joe Root is not a great ambassador for English cricket, for the game in general, the way he goes about the game, the way he speaks about the game, his love of the game, and more importantly, the way he plays and bats with everything else that we've spoken about. To have Joe Root bat the way we don't sometimes admire. We talk about Ponting and Lara, Tendulkar and Kohli. We have one, and his name's Joe Root, and his year has just been phenomenal.
1,708 runs in the calendar year. I mean, as Nas said, that's quite astonishing.
Amazing, really. And that paradox of unbelievable personal success set against a calendar year in which England have lost 9 test matches. You kind of feel that all those runs have gone to waste in a way. I mean, not a waste, because he will look back with great pride at his year, but it hasn't translated into victories, just 4 victories and 9 defeats. So that's a source of regret. But I agree with Nas. He carries himself magnificently as an England captain, despite all the burden on his shoulders, and his batting has been on a different plane this year from anybody else in the England team and most other people around the world. So no compliment high enough for the way Joe Root handles himself and the way that he bats at the crease. Just phenomenal.
And the other paradox is it's not just Root. You're probably talking about a test match side at the moment with 2 or 3, if not 4, if you include Stokes, who's going through a difficult patch, of all-time greats of English cricket in Root, Anderson. I mean, Anderson away from home, 21 wickets at 13, a brilliant spell at Melbourne again this week, Broad. So although they're coming to the end of their career, but we're going through these results with this England team, 9 losses in a year. We're definitely 2, if not 3, of the greatest cricketers we've ever produced in Root, Anderson, Broad, and potentially Stokes. So there is something fundamentally wrong, the drop-off between those names. And you do have to give, as I said earlier, you do have to give these youngsters, Hamid, Crawley, have to give them time. It is not easy, but England fans are wanting to see from that drop-off from Root, Extra has been our 3rd highest run getter of the year. The drop-off is just phenomenal, and something needs to be done about it.
Well, Australia have retained the Ashes then, Keezy. England has obviously got 2 test matches to go. Try and salvage something. There's personal pride up for grabs. What about selection for the New Year's test at the SCG?
Well, I think your bowlers, it's always tough for us to do the bowling because, one, we don't see the pitch and you don't know how people are pulling up. Just go on one thing that they didn't do at the start of the series. Pick your best team you think to win that test match. And if that's, I think Nass is right. You keep going with the young lads in Crawley and Hamid, and you just hope that they find something that might. And that's the point of these guys. I thought it was always going to be tough for Crawley in particular and Hamid. And I always, with Zach, I'm always lenient on him, but you just hope that they have got to find a way. Not necessarily, they've got to learn. They've got to be better for this experience. And then you give them the opportunity to go and do that. but you just pick the team that you think best wins that test match. That's the problem. When you start looking too far ahead, the test match, the series is done before we get to the day-night test in Hobart that we're all waiting for England to breeze through.
I say on to the SCG, Ath, what's the COVID situation out there? Because obviously it was a little bit touch and go for this test. That day was delayed by half an hour. They were waiting on PCRs to arrive for playing in this game.
I think it still is touch and go to an extent, Wardy. Obviously, there were no positive tests that came back from their PCRs today, but I think they're going to be tested again tonight, and they're going to be tested over the next couple of days, because clearly there's a slight fear, given that they've got 6 positives in the extended camp, that there's the delay and then others will get it. So I think there's still a little bit of fingers crossed and hope we can get through. But assuming they do, they'll head off to Sydney. We'll head off to Sydney Friday, and they'll have to come up with a team. I mean, I just didn't agree with the dropping of Burns and Pope for this game myself, and I don't say this in hindsight. I that's what I felt before the game, because, God, what a challenge for Zach Crawley just to come into that game, not played for 3 months. And at least Burns had been playing some cricket, and he was the senior opener. So if you were going to drop one, I thought it should have been Hamid to go. And Burns, who they've invested so much time in and had played 30 test matches and had at least started in the second innings at Adelaide to look as though he was shaping up. And Pope, if he's the best young player in England, which many people think he is, and I probably think he's one of the best young players, you've got to go through these patches. And you'd have found out a little bit about Pope there in that situation on the second evening or third morning today if he'd have still been in. So I found the decision-making very strange over those two. And now what do? Do you suddenly bring Burns back? You just end up going round in circles. So no easy solutions, no right calls, I'm afraid.
We'll end with congratulations to Nas. I believe your record defeat or days to lose in Ashes is still just about intact. Is that correct?
I saw a tweet with Atherton's name on there as well of 11 days. Someone said Atherton.
I saw that tweet and it said 2001, and all I can say is I know damn well I wasn't captain in 2001. I think that was another one of your series when I stepped in for you for 2 games when you'd bust your finger.
I'd won if I was in charge for those 2 games. Your fault.
Well, we'll end it there, lads. Thanks very much indeed for your thoughts as ever. Congratulations to Australia, who retain the Ashes. England, COVID permitting, will go on to Sydney, as will Michael Atherton, and they'll try and salvage something from what could end up being a very, very difficult tour. Thanks for watching and listening.